Hello, everybody, and welcome to Building for Digital Equity Chapter 2 event, Claiming Broadband for Your Community. This event is hosted by the Institute for Self Reliance, ILSR, and the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, NDIA. We are very excited to partner together and give you all the second chapter of the Building for Digital Equity series. In the first Building for Digital Equity event, we discussed the new policies and funding options available that can be applied to the state and local levels to help communities improve their internet services. Today, we will be focusing on organizing around broadband, community impact of the federal funding, and new initiatives in progress thanks to the grant communities that are taking advantage of it. My name is Pamela Rosales, she, hers, and I am the Training and Community Engagement Manager at NDIA. NDIA advances digital equity by supporting community programs and equipping policymakers to act. We advocate for broadband access, tech devices, digital skills training, and tech support by working collaboratively with more than 750 digital inclusion practitioners. I am your MC for today, along with Chris Mitchell. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. And it's exciting. We should have harmonized our grammar, I feel like, or punctuation, because I'm a dash person, you're a comma person. But I do go by he, him pronouns. I'm Christopher Mitchell at the Institute for Local Self Reliance, and I run the Community Broadband Networks team. And this would be a good time to note that it is a very strong team, and our events are team led. And so I want to thank everyone for working behind the scenes to make this an event, a wonderful event, both at ILSR and the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. We are going to have some opportunities for feedback for people at the end, so please stick around and tell us how great it was or what we should do better next time. And we also want to encourage you to talk to each other in the comments, talk to us. You can leave comments both in Facebook and on the YouTube if you're watching that way. Those will be in the system and other people can see them. And we'll see what's going on there. But also, if you would prefer to use Twitter, then there is a hashtag B4DE that you'll see pop up from time to time. Feel free to use that. And we have someone, our colleague Deanne, will be checking that to make sure we are responding to those questions if anything's popping up. So lots of ways to interact with us. And then once again, we're doing trivia thanks to the work of Dazli on our team, as well as Pamela and others who gave feedback on some strong trivia questions. So we are going to encourage you to go and get signed up. We'll be doing those trivia questions 3 at a shot. We'll have 3 trivia breaks of 3 questions each. And we'll read the question. You'll have a chance to do it in another browser on another device if you're so technically sophisticated. But go to telecomtrivia.link. And this is a good opportunity to watch this live, because if you're late, then you won't be able to do the trivia. So I think that's the parts I was supposed to do. And I'll throw it back to you, Pamela.
Awesome. And yes, also with the trivia, there will be 2 winners, just like last time. So please participate and you'll get some fun NDIA goodies at the end.
I think we're all winners.
But there's also losers.
She says, looking at me. Thank you. I appreciate that. I can take it. I got thick skin.
There's always winners, but there's 2 that'll only get the prize. So make sure to participate. And then at the end, we'll give you a contact person to get those goodies. So at the end, we'll also have a Q&A segment. So please share any and all questions that you have throughout the event. Our team will be monitoring it. And then we'll have a nice 20-minute block for answering any questions. You can, again, submit those questions in the chat with other participants on YouTube. But if you do have other pressing questions that you would like more one-on-one support with, please email Dosman at dlee@ilsr.org. So our agenda for the next hour starts off with learning from folks at the People's Resource Center based in LA on their community organizing efforts around broadband for their community. Then we'll learn from our first panelist, Joshua Edmonds with the City of Detroit. After that, we'll do our first trivia break. And then afterwards, we'll hear from the Digital Equity Initiative from the California Community Foundation. We'll also have our second panelist go after, Anna Reed from the Pew Charitable Trust. Then after that, we'll do our second trivia break, and we'll hear from our last organization, Digital Equity in Charlotte, Then we'll finish up with the last final trivia break and then open it up for Q&A.
I'm so excited we got a character from Sex and the City. I did not expect that on this show. We're definitely improving. Charlotte is my favorite too, so I'm really excited about that. You know, there's probably people in the audience that's too old of a reference for now. So that's just, I made myself feel old.
Yeah, I haven't really watched Sex and the City, but I believe you.
All right. I said I would stick to the script, and obviously I'm already off of it. But I did just want to know, I mean, I think one of our main focuses here is definitely to hear from practitioners that are doing things in communities. That's where we're going to be elevating up. We'd love to hear people's questions or even ideas about what they're doing in their communities as they hear these things and it resonates.
Awesome. So to start off this event, we're going to hear from Jorge Rivera, the co-executive director from the People's Resource Center.
Hi, my name is Jorge Rivera, and I'm the executive co-director of the People's Resource Center. We are a worker self-directed nonprofit organization, and we aim to serve BIPOC communities by facilitating processes that create safe, healing, and connected spaces by means of facilitation, workshops, and advocacy. At the People's Resource Center, we've been around for a couple of years. I personally have been doing tenant and affordable housing community organizing for over 10 years. And we serve namely the San Gabriel Valley within Los Angeles County. We got involved in the digital equity space earlier this year as we started to note that a lot of the people that we serve, the community members out there that we are in touch with, are having a lot of difficulty either with access, with affordability, or with even just literacy of the internet. And we were invited to be a part of this space specifically because we are in the San Gabriel Valley, which is an area that is not very much organized right now. And we are a part of Digital Equity Los Angeles. We are also involved in the newly formed CADE, California Alliance for Digital Equity. We participate in spaces that advocate on the local level here in Los Angeles County, at the state level, in the California Public Utilities Commission, as well as legislatively. And we are also involved on some degree in the federal level, the national level, at the FCC. And we are namely here to organize community and to support the coalition and the fight for bridging the digital divide in doing community organizing. And our very first step in doing community organizing is understanding the experiences and the needs of the community. And so right now, we are trying to gather information and data that is going to be able to paint the picture of what we already know is going on. And once we gather this data, we'll be able to analyze it and create narratives and messaging around it so that it can further our cause in bridging the digital divide. As community organizers, we then take this information and we go out and educate community members to help them understand why they may not have access to the internet. It's not just a matter of not being able to afford it. And if you are able to afford it, that it should be of quality, and helping them understand all of these conflicts that are actually happening in their experiences. And once we're able to inform and educate folks, then we can do a little bit of agitation and political education and get them involved so that we can lift their voices and have their experiences help move this cause forward. And once we're able to get them more engaged, then they can be a little bit more involved politically, speaking with their representatives, and then having a seat at the table so that they can have their voices heard when decisions are made in the future. Community organizing in general is definitely a long investment in the community. And we understand that this is going to be a lengthy fight. And as the People's Resource Center, we're just honored and privileged to be standing side by side with such great advocates, organizers, educators, healthcare providers, and everybody that's in this space with us. It's just an honor and a privilege to be working side by side with everyone. And we're going to be in it for the long haul. And we're really happy to be here. Thank you for allowing us to be able to share the story of our work and why we're engaged. We really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Big thank you to Jorge for sharing the ways in which the People's Resource Center is organizing around broadband. I love their strategy of understanding the needs of their community and using that information to educate and empower community members to take action. It's great that they're highlighting issues that lead to people to not have access to the internet. And we know that affordability is just one of the many barriers that make it difficult for people to get online. Other barriers include having slow and unreliable internet access, not having the digital skills necessary to use the internet in the way that they want to, and not having the appropriate devices to use the internet in the way that they want to. So I also love how we emphasize that the community organizing, it's a long investment within our communities and that it's a lengthy fight. Coming in with that knowledge can help organizers and practitioners from not burning out or resorting to short-term solutions that don't move the community towards digital equity in the long term.
I agree, and I remember I was just reflecting on being in Binghamton earlier this week in upstate New York at an event with a few hundred people talking about some of these issues, and I was just reminded that I feel like a lot of people don't realize how local a lot of these things are. I mean, I think that, we broadly talk about the three-legged stool, and a friend of mine who was there was just sort of like, well, yeah, it's three legs, but each one of those legs has like 1,000 components, And one of the things that I was reflecting on in the discussion was that I think we assume well, this city needs better internet access. Well, okay, but like within the city, there's neighborhoods that have different challenges, and frankly, you might have a cable provider that does a good job in some neighborhoods and not as good in others. So we have the real need to engage at that local level, have those local communities. There's no shortcut. We need communities like the People's Resource Center out there doing this work to make sure people are actively engaged. So I just think it's really important to do that work on the ground. We need folks, many folks are already doing it. We need to make sure they're well resourced to do it. So I don't know if you want to reflect on that, if I should just go and introduce Joshua.
I think we can go ahead and move over to Joshua.
Okay, I get to introduce Joshua. Joshua, hey, it's great to see you again. Sorry it's not in person this time, but we're looking forward to seeing your presentation. And Joshua is the City of Detroit's Director of Digital Inclusion. Is the country's first municipal director of digital inclusion. I didn't even know that. I just learned that right now. I should have read the script 5 minutes ago. But I know that Joshua is one of a kind. He did really good work in Cleveland, and he brought that knowledge to Detroit, and he's continuing it. He's been responsible for the creation of Connect 313, Detroit's sustainable digital inclusion strategy. And Joshua knows this. He's working directly with people on the ground. It's a great continuation from what we were just talking about. So Joshua, why don't you launch into your presentation, and then we got a couple of questions for you coming out of it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Rivera actually hit on a lot of the points that we're able to uplift to, and definitely, though he doesn't need one nor the organization, but act as a co-signer, because quite frankly, I came to Detroit January 2019, and at that time, obviously there wasn't a pandemic that could help us attract additional federal investment. Though it wasn't like people were trying in municipalities, again, there just wasn't a pathway of understanding. And even when there was a pathway for understanding, I think a lot of people looked at digital equity as more of a charity effort. That people were donating computers or donating hotspot service or subsidizing internet service. And I think that piece is the part that we try to get around. And so in January 2019, I come to the city, and immediately there's a mic that was shoved in my face, and I was asked, how are you going to bridge Detroit's digital divide? And at the time, the talking point that I used for the better half of that year was I wanted to make Detroit the national model for digital inclusion. And that was something I kind of said under duress. But at the end of the day, we have been able to accomplish some pretty incredible feats. And I would highlight a few of those. So all 2019 was focusing on advocacy, building awareness, building community, building what we refer to as Connect 313, which today has now over 700 community, nonprofit, private, and resident members all participating in some form or fashion on bridging Detroit's digital divide. We have our own fund that we have set up, and we have done a series of campaigns, all at the intersection of digital equity. And we have made certain investments out of the fund, such as like a neighbor technology hub network, a community ambassador network that looks a lot like community organizing. And then in addition to that, us focusing a lot more on ways that we could leverage data. And data is obviously something that's coming up a lot more as it relates to the BEAD funding, the challenge process, how to prove an area is unserved or underserved. But when we began thinking about, or when we were thinking about data before in 2020, realistically, it was how do we build a data set that is so comprehensive that everyone is pulling from the same source. Everyone is now advocating off of the same data. And quite frankly, we are now all advocating off of that data for better political accountability at the least bit, but in more ways of looking at ways that we could inform philanthropy, inform any type of private or federal investment, how data could essentially be that informing tool. And so outside of the data play, we are now getting into the community organizing a lot more. We did recently sign a contract with 270 Strategies with Connect 3 and 3, and they're teaching us how to do better community organizing and how to actually take the values that we say, like locally led, expertly informed. We progress at the speed of trust in our broader digital equity work under the Connect 3 and 3 umbrella. How do we turn those values into action? How do we actually get our community ambassadors and our networks to actually like get engaged in that capacity? And so that's what we are now actively doing. But one of the big pieces that I'm going to highlight is probably the one that brings me most joy right now, and as well as a lot of other emotions, is we are deploying fiber optic infrastructure in one of our neighborhoods in Detroit. Specifically, we're doing an automated open access network. And that is pretty much a fancy way of saying that we are, the city, going to be deploying fiber to every household in this neighborhood. And we are not going to be the service provider. We're just going to own the infrastructure, but we are going to allow a private operator to essentially provision service. So if Detroiters want additional internet choices, that works. In addition to that, as we look at other avenues that we might talk about, such as more stable remote patient monitoring, or even getting down into the weeds around greater fintech activation and looking at fiber's possibilities. We have told the community, and we've been very clear with them, that what we're putting in here, the benefit of fiber and the benefit of an open access network, we're still trying to understand all the benefits, but that doesn't stop us from essentially going down this pathway. There has been a lot of resistance at times. But at the end of the day, we have really looked at fiber to be the preferred infrastructure standard for Detroit. And that is something that we have set. That's not to say that we're not interested in other areas, but again, we're setting it there. Now, the reason why we're locating our effort in a neighborhood called Hope Village is because last year they suffered a very prolonged internet outage. And, we had received calls from community members. And as we used our rescue plan money to essentially invest in that neighborhood, it feels pretty good to be able to work in the community in that way. And, today, within the next hour or so, we are doing another community meeting. We've done a series of community meetings there where we explain open access, we explain infrastructure, we explain all these different elements. And we are, again, doing that again today. And I think that what you're hearing from us is like all of our past work on digital equity around, doing commercials, broader computer distributions, partnering with national refurbishers like Human IT. We did all those things. Those things are all valuable. But now that we're in the infrastructure fight, I think the infrastructure fight wraps a bow in this and ties it up in a way where now we are actually standing on digital equity, and we can look from A to Z and say the city is practicing this in a way that, quite frankly, allows us to see where we're moving the needle, while at the same time seeing where we have a long way to go. So I see that others are now coming back on screen, and I'll wrap it up by saying that, just keep an eye out on the infrastructure priorities that the city is expressing. And it is my ask to anyone else who is obviously working in this space that the infrastructure prioritization, specifically in underserved areas and unserved areas, is actually flagged in a way where we can be actionable in our conversations, and we can be bold in pushing back where we need to push back.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joshua. Before you leave, could you share with us just a few lessons from your community organizing work or experience that other digital inclusion organizations or coalitions can learn from?
Yeah, like first of all, is it easy work?
No, no, it's not easy. And if my camera was more high definition, you'd see a lot more gray hairs. But thankful for the graininess. But I think that, a few lessons. One, there's historically, how municipalities might be perceived, especially when we get into the local community. You have a lot of people who feel, and justifiably so, the effects of disinvestment or the displacement and a number of things. And I think that more than anything, you have to acknowledge that. You can't work around it. And it's one of those things where I'm like, heck, I'm not from here. I moved here from Cleveland. But at the end of the day, it's like, no, if you're going to be working for this entity, you have a responsibility of being aware of that. You need to communicate that at the onset. And I think when you do that, when you work transparently under that banner, I mean, you don't have to kiss the ring every single time you talk. I mean, that's a bit much. But when you do work underneath that banner, it allows you to essentially build that greater trust and that transparency. And I think that's the piece where that's probably the supreme lesson here. The secondary and tertiary lessons would just be, one, knowing your stuff, knowing that community well enough, being able to speak to certain values that are in there because it shows that you spent time there. And then the last one is just being able to position the community in a way where even when things don't go well, communicating that. I wanted to have an RFP for construction already out the door and construction vendors selected by today. So we chose this day for this community meeting. That's not happening, unfortunately. I got to go in front of these people and apologize that, hey, we put something out there and it's not happening the way that we wanted. But again, being able to be that accountable has really fast-tracked our relationship to the point that we actually have a really good relationship with this local community.
That's great, Joshua. We are going to let you go to that meeting, which, I wish you the best of luck at. I want to ask you just a very quick question, which is you're building the network. The city will own the fiber, and you're working with a couple of consultants, Entry Point being one that was helping you with software to run the network. But are they actually the vendor that will be operating the network on the behalf of the city? How is that going to work?
So we are still in that phase of understanding. So we have a suite of RFPs that we still need to develop, which that is the biggest one. We anticipate a lot of folks having interest in operating that. But you got it right on. We are working with Entry Point. Bruce Patterson has been incredible, and we are going to be owning this, but we absolutely will not be operating this. And we are going to look to a private provider there, and we'll just provision that service via an RFP.
Thank you so much, Joshua.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joshua. Some of the questions, thank you for putting them in the chat. We'll be able to answer some of them at the end of the event, so keep them coming. All right, still ahead, you'll hear from the California Community Foundation, Pew Charitable Trust, and Digital Equity in Charlotte. But next up, we have our first trivia.
Yes, so here's where it's going to work. That I'm going to start reading the question in a second, and I believe Henry behind the scenes will be magically trying to time it so that as the lag from the feed comes out, it will work well. So get to telecomtrivia.link, and we are going to get started here with the first question. The first question is, what speed does the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, define as the minimum threshold for broadband for a household? And it's a good little note that this is for a household, not a person, not a device, but for the whole household. We got the options of 50 megabits by 10 megabits, 25 by 3, 20 by 4, 15 by 8. And those Mbps are all megabits per second. Did you know this one, Pamela? Did you?
Oh, yeah. Well, before the regional inclusion work, no.
And time's up. And the answer was 25 megabits down, 3 megabits up. So we have someone named Jason's at the top. So second question goes to Pamela.
All right. So the second question is, in what year did the current speed definition go into effect? Was it 2018, 2014, 2015, or 2012? Fun fact, in 2010, the standard speed was 4 megabits per second for downloading and 1 megabit per second for uploading. A lot slower.
And Pamela, I think you just got to be real loud on this because your voice gets mixed in with the music. So I could hear it well, but just make sure you're shouting out the trivia questions.
Okay, sounds good. All right, time's up. The answer is 2015. Let's see who the winners are.
2015.
All right.
With the data that had been collected in like 2013 and 2014. So it is even older than 2015 if you were thinking earlier than that. The third question I get to do, what was the speed definition for broadband per the FCC prior to the current one? And if you were listening, it's possible that Pamela might have shared that in the answer to the previous one. Before the 25.3, was it 4.1? Was it 12.2? Was it 7.3? Or was it 10.1? And this one's a little tricky because different agencies did different things, but this is the FCC's prior speed threshold. And the answer is it was 4.1. Pamela dropped a knowledge bomb to give people a little hint, just to see who's listening well. So Lauren C's at the top. And we had a lot of people thought it was 10.1 because that's what the rural utility service used frequently before 25.3 came out. And in fact, still used after 25.3 came out. None of this is easy. So don't feel bad. Thanks for participating. Pamela, I think you're going to get us back on track here.
Yes. And don't worry, we still have 2 more trivia breaks. So if you're not Lauren, you still have a chance to be at number 1. But we will have 2 winners. So 2 people will get some NDIA goodies. All right. So again, this is a reminder to share your questions with us throughout the event so we can answer them in the Q&A portion at the end. So next up, we'll be hearing from Shaina Engelin, the Director of Digital Equity Initiative with the California Community Foundation, to talk more about the coalition, and she'll also be sharing lessons that they learned from their organizing efforts.
Hi, I'm Shaina Engelin. I'm the Director of the Digital Equity Initiative at the California Community Foundation. And I love the work of our initiative and our new but quickly growing coalition of more than 40 organizations working in LA County, California, and beyond. So thank you for the invitation to talk about it. The initiative is a multi-year project of CCF to seed a digital equity movement in LA County that has the power and capacity to successfully advocate for fast, reliable, and affordable broadband for all 10 million Angelinos in all of our 88 cities, school districts, hospital districts, and urban, suburban, and even rural communities. We're focused on systems change solution to the digital divide, including remedying decades of digital redlining of communities across the county. LA's low-income communities, communities of color, and immigrant communities have seen systemic underinvestment in broadband, leaving them with slower, less reliable, and more expensive internet. And as is true across the country, these patterns of digital inequity often mirror the patterns of real estate redlining of decades past, as well as the race and income-based inequities readily apparent in everything from education to health outcomes to pollution metrics. So our coalition is taking direct aim at that reality. And in just over a year of collective action, we've already together been able to notch some really significant and exciting wins. And so a year out, some early lessons learned for organizing a winning broadband equity coalition. First is the importance of organizing around clarity of values. Ours are that what we build and what we fight for together are first and foremost community rooted, that they localize control as much as possible, that advance systemic solutions, not band-aids or short-term thinking, and that they're consistent with an understanding of broadband as a utility, not a luxury or a consumer good. Second lesson learned is how central a clear-eyed power analysis is to drive strategic, effective, and efficient collective action. With a no-nonsense understanding of the policy and political landscape we're working in, we've been able to focus on tackling the policy changes most critical to aligning change with our values and building and aligning the allies with the power and relationships we might not have, and plugging into statewide and national networks we need to help us, or creating those networks where they don't exist. And third, resourcing and building capacity, really building this network to do digital equity work within and across organizations that have a focus and a track record of power building and mobilization. So almost none of the organizations in our coalition had any digital divide programming before 2021. We're a coalition of education equity advocates and service providers, community clinics and health equity advocates, climate justice advocates, tenant organizers, economic development advocates, immigration attorneys, etc. And we've leveraged our shared experience of digital equity for ourselves and our communities and of those that we serve, to power our new and newly focused collective action that amplifies and builds on existing equity work, existing power work, and existing relationships. So again, LA's Digital Equity Coalition is my favorite thing to gush about. So thank you, NDIA and ILSR, for being a critical part of our coalition, and also for this opportunity to unpack it a bit. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Shaina.
Yes. Shaina's, it's wonderful working with Shaina. I just have so much respect for Shaina.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And what stood out to me was the fact that most of those organizations in their coalition had zero digital equity programming before 2021. So being that these organizations have witnessed the digital divide impact their community in different ways, from health advocates to immigrant attorneys, it's amazing how the coalition leveraged their shared experience with digital equity to build capacity.
Yeah, and I think just a reminder for folks to feel free to share, this video. It's going to be up at the same locations afterward too. So keep sharing out just how wonderful you think Pamela is and how I'm dragging down the ship. But speaking about Shaina's work, I think to drop out of some of the language that I feel like organizations use when they're steeped in talking to other nonprofits and stakeholders, what you have is a bunch of organizations that care deeply about this, but it's not their primary issue. And someone like Shaina can help them to figure out how they can engage in a way that they're still focused on their primary issue, but they're able to make a difference in this other secondary issue that is important for them winning on their first issue. And so, it's not about going in there and being like, hey, stop caring about the schools. You got to do broadband. It's more like these are things you can do even as you're trying to strengthen the schools. So that's Shaina's doing it terrifically. And I really hope that people are able to learn more from what she's doing there, as well as her team. I mean, she would give a lot of credit to others as well. I think I'm supposed to be introducing Anna Reed now, if I'm reading this correctly. I don't believe in a fourth wall. There's no fourth wall with me. And then we're going to have our second trivia break, and we're going to learn more from the digital equity in Charlotte, North Carolina, it turns out. I'm sorry if anyone got their hopes up about popular shows from decades ago. I'm going to be introducing Anna Reed now. And Anna Reed is someone that I believe I first met when she was with the American Planning Association. But she's gone on to do still more impressive work with at the Pew Charitable Trust. I always feel bad when I say just Pew, because I think they like to use their full name. She's a senior officer there. And Anna is someone that has really been learning a lot about what's happening, behind the scenes on this work. So I'm looking forward to you sharing that with us, Anna. Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation today. And it's always great to hear about what Joshua is working on in Detroit and these other local examples. So I wanted to mostly talk about engaging with state broadband offices as part of digital equity efforts. We at Pew have spent the last several years looking at the role that states have been playing in expanding broadband, and specifically their grant programs and sort of the surrounding policy environment. Until this point, many of those programs have been fairly constrained by the amount of funding available for broadband, and states have primarily been focused on infrastructure. And so with the availability of the federal funding, we are seeing a shift where states are more engaged, becoming more engaged in digital equity work as well. And there have been some interesting pilots that states have done, some interesting activities, but again, they've been kind of limited at scale due to the amount of available funding. So for example, Virginia did some really interesting work around piloting different models of addressing affordability, from community-wide Wi-Fi solutions to Wi-Fi hotspots to connecting people to existing affordable offers with their coronavirus relief funds. Rhode Island Housing recently did a round of, or last year, did a round of digital equity grants specifically focused on affordable housing developments in the state and addressing access and adoption challenges among residents. So with that and with the availability of federal funding, it really is important to begin engaging with your state broadband offices. In most states, the state broadband office is the entity that it will be managing both the infrastructure and the digital equity component. So that won't be true in every state. And through both the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment funding and the Digital Equity Act funding in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, states will be engaging in planning processes. Those will be kicking off relatively soon based on the timelines that have been outlined. And on the infrastructure side, it's notable that the plans will be required to include a digital equity vision and address Digital Equity Act funds as well. And also that where states can show that they'll meet the unserved and underserved areas and then the community anchor institution prioritizations, funding is available for non-deployment uses as well. And that funding doesn't have to be used sequentially. So ensuring that those uses, those priorities are reflected in those plans is very important right now, because those investments can start once states get their funding allocations, as long as their plans show that they are able to reach those unserved and underserved areas. Again, the funding can then be rolled out concurrently as opposed to sequentially. And then in addition to, that being a component of the plan, states are required to engage stakeholders and document that they've engaged with a wide range of stakeholders, and that engagement is supposed to be ongoing. So, the planning process is an important way to ensure that, your state is learning about great work that you have been doing or that is happening, and ensuring that, some of that is reflected in their plans. But it's also not a sort of finite process, right? And so there should be opportunities to engage going forward. So, engaging in the process and then ensuring that you're supporting, demonstrating support, because that'll be part of evaluating projects as well, for projects, that you would support seeing deployed in your community. So it looks like they're back on screen, so I'll wrap up there.
Thank you, Anna. And so, I feel like you have a lot of experience in these public processes and kind of, sharing plans and getting feedback from the public. Do you have any tips for people that may not have ever engaged really before? I mean, you have people running these local efforts who we're telling them, hey, you have a great opportunity. The state has to listen to you. But what should they be thinking about? Where could they get models of how to interact with the state and what to ask for and things like that? Do you have any tips on that?
So I think one thing that, is challenging in answering that question is the process will look different in every state. Ideally, it will be a very engaged process with direct outreach to multiple stakeholder groups and multiple organizations and with multiple points of contact so that groups are able to engage. Realistically, there will be some places where there is a public meeting and that is the opportunity for input. And so I think, connecting with your state office early, getting a sense of what they're planning to do, what that's going to look like. And I think this is more for sort of a membership group or like a coalition that can then share it with its members, right? Like not every individual group needs to necessarily go through that process. But I think if you're looking at kind of like how do you, find out what that process is and how do you make sure you communicate it to people, sort of amplify the communication of where to engage to, the stakeholders that you work with on a daily basis. So I know that's not a great answer. And I think, as we see what these processes are shaping up to look like, there will be some more specific, I think, opportunities to talk about what's going well and where states have engaged people, really done a good job with outreach and engagement.
I think that's a really good gut check answer, though, which is that in one state, it might be a public meeting where almost no one gets to really share their views. In another one, it might be a multi-month engagement process where there actually is substantive engagement. Let me ask you if there's any quick resources that you want to plug. As you were talking, I was just remembering that Common Sense Media has that great matrix that they built, and we plugged that in the last time we did one of these events. Are there any resources you would point people to as we're trying to track all these different opportunities?
Sure. So we have put together some resources on state broadband plans and planning, which, I'm always happy to point people to our resources at Pew. I also do like to note that, while this is focused on broadband and these planning funds are going specifically to address broadband related priorities, the process itself is not that different from other types of planning. And there are a lot of really great resources. You mentioned that, we first met when I worked at the American Planning Association. They have great resources on planning and educational materials for, planning commissioners and sort of community members interested in becoming more engaged in planning processes. So I would definitely point people towards their resources as well. And just kind of generally highlight, there are organizations that do have really good tools focused specifically on planning, though not necessarily on broadband. So those are always a good resource as well as you're thinking about these planning processes and how to engage, or what information may be useful to help stakeholders sort of more actively engage in the process.
Excellent.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much, Anna, for your time and sharing those resources. Next up, we have our second trivia break. So Henry's going to do his magic, and then I've got a question. Oh.
I did see people are throwing answers in the chat, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, for people that want to be on the record, I just want to be clear. The winners have to come from the people who went to telecomtrivia.link. It's just if you want to be in the game, you got to sign up that way. But I think, Pamela, you're the first trivia question personer.
I am the first trivia question personer. So for the first question, how many households are there in the U.S.? Is it 122 million, 157 million, 143 million, or 130?
There's definitely a lot.
Yeah. If a lot could be one of the selections, that would be the right one. A household, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, is considered to be a person living within one housing unit, or all persons living within one housing unit, including apartments, houses, or single room, and they don't have to be related. All right, the answer is 130 million. Let's see what the leaderboard is looking like. Oh, ooh. Denise is catching up. But Lauren is still on top. All right.
Yeah. And you're going to see a little bit of a theme in this one. The next question is also relating to households. And the question is, how many households have signed up for ACP, the Affordable Connectivity Plan? Is it 16.8 million, 12.5 million, 13.7 million, or 26.9 million? And I will avoid spoiling the next question by just discussing a little bit. Not to tease you, I was gonna literally go into right what the next question was, just naturally. But the question is, how many households have signed up for this program that's making their connections more affordable? And the answer is 12.5 million. So that may seem like a lot of households, but we'll put that in some context with the final question here.
Yes. Thanks, Chris, for not doing what I did. All right, last question. How many households are eligible for ACP?
Probably more than 12.5 million.
Right. It's taking one big guess. So we got 48 million, 63, 37 million, or 51 million. Fun fact, no state has broken through the 50% threshold of enrollment for eligible houses, but some states like California, Louisiana, and Kentucky, to name a few, have surpassed that 30% mark. All right, time's up, and the answer is 48 million.
And looks like Lauren might have missed that one. people are gaining. And for the record, that's a number that we're using. We saw it from the White House. If you do the number of households that are at 200% of the poverty level, which is a good quick check, that number is a bit smaller. But remember that everyone that's attached to a Title I school is eligible. So, for instance, my family is eligible, although we were making more than 200% of the poverty level last time I checked, due in part to my wife being a very smart person. So,
and you too, you're smart.
It does help. I do some work too.
All right. So for our final organization, we have Bruce Clark from he's the executive director for the Center for Digital Equity in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Hi, my name is Bruce Clark, Executive Director for the Center for Digital Equity at Queen's University of Charlotte, a backbone organization focused on a collective impact strategy on how we make Mecklenburg County the most digitally equitable community in America. We work with residents, public and private sector partners to co-create solutions that allow us to achieve that mission. What's really important about that mission is how we work and collaborate with residents on expanding access to broadband here in our community. One way we do that is through our countywide digital Navigator service. Any resident in Mecklenburg County can simply call 311 and get connected with the digital Navigator. Digital Navigators help residents with a myriad of things, including signing up for the Affordable Connectivity Plan, finding affordable technology, or connecting with a skill provider who allows them to create new opportunities in their lives. We also are focused on our corridor-based innovation campaigns, which are a strategy to bring resources that exist in our community directly to residents in the communities that they live in, while also building relationships and trust with those residents to learn what other things that we can be doing to support their ability to thrive in our modern culture. We just conducted a corridor-based innovation campaign this past weekend, helping distribute 100 laptops to residents in our community, helped residents sign up for Affordable Connectivity Plan. But most importantly, we listened to the residents of our community, brought them into the process, and helped understand what we can be doing better to make broadband access and broadband adoption, access to technology, access to skill providers, and technical support easy and smooth and ubiquitous within our community. If you want to learn more, you can check out the Center for Digital Equity.org, and we appreciate the opportunity to share with you today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you again, Bruce, for sharing your work with Center for Digital Equity. It's great learning about their corridor-based innovation campaign and their strategy of bringing community resources like distributing those 100 laptops to residents, helping them sign up for the Affordable Connectivity Program. And also, we're seeing a theme here of using these as an opportunity to better serve their community by learning firsthand what the community members are experiencing.
Yes, and the Charlotte region had also benefited from the organization Eliminate the Digital Divide, E2D, which had done really great work. I believe it was north of Charlotte in Mecklenburg County. And there's just a lot of really good things that have come out of Charlotte that I think people could be learning from.
Awesome. All right. And so lastly, we have our final trivia break. So we've got a few more, 3 more questions if you really want to get those NDIA goodies. All right. So for the first question.
All right, now these are getting hard now. We're making them a bit harder. So how much was the estimated return on investment for the EPB, which is the Electric Power Board Municipal Fiber Network in Chattanooga, by the 10-year mark? So 10 years after they built this network, there was a study done to estimate what the return on investment was. And just a useful little note, that network cost, I can't remember exactly, but on the order of $200-300 million that's used by the electric system as well as for delivering broadband throughout the region. The largest municipal fiber network to date. And the answer is, over 10 years, the estimated value of $2.7 billion of benefits to the community comes from a variety of jobs, electricity benefits, and there's a wonderful study by Bento Lobo that you can look into to learn more about that.
Awesome. Looks like Lauren's still undefeated. All right. The second question, how many states does ILSR consider to have significant barriers to municipal broadband networks? 22 states, 8 states, 14, or 17. And there's positive news. The number of states with significant barriers and restrictions has decreased since the pandemic, specifically Arkansas and Washington. Giving you some time. 3, 2, 1. All right. And the answer is 17. So at the beginning of the pandemic, it was 19. Now it's down to 17.
That's right. And there are some additional states like Ohio and Idaho, Michigan, where they are not necessarily passing new restrictions, but some of those states don't have restrictions, but they are nonetheless getting in the way of federal funds going to cities to solve these problems. So that's disappointing. But we do have our final question. And the final question, I think, is a pretty good one here. What was the first federal regulatory agency in the United States? So we have 4 different options: the Bureau of Chemistry, the Interstate Commerce Commission, United States Maritime Commission, or the United States Information Agency. So which was the first federal regulatory agency in the United States? It had to do with railroads. This is a great time. It's a great history time. A lot of great books about this time going back. It really is led to the modern economy, but it was the Interstate Commerce Commission, which was shortly thereafter the first regulatory agency to be captured by private interests, the large monopolies, sort of were telling it what to do. Most people got that. So well done, folks.
Woohoo! Congrats on finishing the trivia break. So I think the leaderboard, if I read it correctly, it was Lauren and Denise who are the top 2 winners. So congratulations. Oh,
yep.
Actually, never mind. Yeah, Denise,
yeah.
Lauren, and Antonella.
Antonella.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for participating. The top 3 winners, please.
Sorry, if you zoom out a little bit there, I feel like that's a really good mix. The trivia questions, I feel like, had some real challenges for folks. We had some people that got them, but everyone got at least one right. I mean, I should say that every question had at least someone get it right. So that's good.
Yeah. And I think that we didn't give them enough time to Google. So that was coming straight from their mind. Awesome job, everybody. For the winners, please contact Amanda at digitalinclusion.org to receive your prizes. And then for our last 20 minutes, we are going to give you that promised Q&A throughout the questions that we received throughout the event. But before I do that, I just want to give some updates on the Digital Equity Act. So applications for the state digital equity planning grant programs are due in less than 2 weeks. So July 12th, to be exact, for the 50 states, District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. And for U.S. territories and possessions other than Puerto Rico, like Indian tribes, Alaska Native entities, and Native Hawaiian organizations, they will need to submit a letter of intent by July 12 as well. And after the July 12th, the next on that timeline for DEA will be September, where states will start beginning to receive funding for their planning. And so NDIA, we have resources for you. Go ahead and check out our blog for the recording of our Digital Equity Act and BEAD webinar we hosted last month. In the webinar, we talk about the timeline, requirements for the state plans, and much more. And we're also working on a toolkit for states to help them build their digital equity plans. So that will be coming out soon. So please join our listserv and stay updated when that is launched. That's where we'll announce that. All right.
And if I could also just do a brief update as well. This will lead into our first question, which is what happens if a state is not planning to submit that information. So Pamela, I don't know if you're ready to talk on that, but that'll be the first question that we wrestle with. But that was the Digital Equity Act, and that requires states to submit information to the federal government. Many of you are familiar with the BEAD program as well, which also requires states to submit a letter of interest. And it sure looks to us like most states and additional territories are planning to participate. I think we had some questions about a few of them, but our understanding is that it seems like all of them will be participating. A number of states, in fact, perhaps a majority of states, still have not gotten into paperwork to start the process for the Capital Projects Fund, which is the $10 billion fund. 4 states have already received their money for that because they were so well prepared. But there's 3 different things that states should be thinking about right now. You can always ask people like Pamela and I, if you're having trouble sorting those out. But in the event that a state is not moving forward on the Digital Equity Act, do you have any recommendations for what a person on the ground does in that situation, Pamela?
I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question?
Oh, sure. If you find out that your state is not planning on submitting a plan for the Digital Equity Act, do you have any recommendations?
That I don't know at the top of my head, but you could reach out to our policy team over at NDIA. They can answer any of your policy questions there, and they can put you to the right people as well.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to recommend, because I know that in some circumstances, folks are organizing to make sure they're pressuring the state not to miss this opportunity. So it's very important. If you know that your state is waffling on this, we have to make sure that powerful interests know. I mean, just to give you a sense, like groups like AARP have a lot of political influence, and they're not always tied in to know about these different deadlines. I mean, if you're confused about these deadlines, imagine if your portfolio involves 10, 12 other policy issues as well. So we all need to know. So shout it from the rooftops if you're hearing that, so that we can make sure that different interests are all pushing the state to make sure they participate.
Awesome. All right.
So yeah, we did have a question then. We got a couple of questions here. So if a state is not doing the BEAD or the Digital Equity Fund, shout it from the heavens so that others can get involved and make sure states aren't missing these opportunities. Let's see. There's. Do you want to read the first question that Yvette put in?
Sure. So the first question we have, just interested in budget and staff and source of funds for both the Detroit and California initiatives. It seems that unless one is a city-sponsored or state-sponsored organization devoted solely to digital equity, then government support, funding, and staffing is incredibly challenging.
Yeah, that I don't know entirely how to do it, how to answer that. I do think Joshua, I don't remember if he mentioned it, but this is being funded with a portion of the funds that they have received from the rescue plan. One thing that I would say to redirect, because I don't know how to answer the question entirely, is that states are often not using all of the authority within these federal programs. So, we might have states where you can use broadband for like a lot of different things. Trying to figure out where my camera is, like this. And then the state says, yeah, but we're only going to use it for this. And that's disappointing. But that's where, as Anna Reed was talking about the planning, it's important to be pushing the state to make sure that, for instance, they're not just spending all this money on infrastructure. We want to make sure that we're seeing real digital equity investments, because that's the fight of the future. I mean, I think we're going to resolve infrastructure for most Americans before we resolve these digital equity questions. So it's really important to push them on that. There was a different question that I feel like I'm better equipped to answer, and I'm curious, Pamela. It was directed at Joshua, but I think we can answer about cities like Phoenix or others. How are they? Are they in contact with each other to learn from each other? Well, you could just take this to talk about how they might engage with each other. There's a certain network email list, for instance, that I use frequently that I know that Josh was on, right?
Yes. So if you all want to get connected with other folks, other practitioners, or other people doing similar work and have similar questions, go ahead and join our NDIA community listserv, which there should be a link coming in the chat soon. There you have access to our thriving listserv of people who asks very similar questions, have the same questions as you, as well as access to our community calls, which are held every third Friday of the month, where we bring in experts who talk about resources or toolkits or updates within the digital inclusion field.
And thank you. As you were sharing that, and that's, I mean, I have a lot of respect for the management that you all do on that list to make sure that it stays on topic, and it's very valuable. The last part of that question that I was blanking on, because I was just going through a little panic attack in my head, was this issue of, unless one is a state sponsored or city sponsored organization, how do you deal with this? And it's a very good question, because you don't expect like individuals to build roads. You don't These are hard tasks to do, to wrestle with digital equity across entire neighborhoods and entire communities. And so you really do need to push your elected representatives to take this seriously and invest in it. We need to have digital equity coalitions, I think, that span not just the local governments, but the local governments have to be involved, and they have to have others. And so, Pamela, I was just curious. I mean, you're in Chicago, right? It's kind of a big place. It's complicated. Do you have any recommendations in terms of how one engages with a city of any size to make sure that they're actually working on this, and is not just solely folks from nonprofit organizations that are meaning well?
Oh, I mean, reach out to your state, like local broadband office, or see if they have anybody that's on their staff that's working on digital equity. There's a lot of positions opening up right now where people are looking for people to specifically work on digital inclusion projects. Try to find those individuals and see what resources they have. Also look at the coalitions. There might be coalitions that exist in your state or in your community that you can join and be a part of. So you can hear more from other anchor institutions that aren't just specifically nonprofits that serve the community. So that would be my best advice.
And I would say that it's really worth looking at groups that are involved. I mean, if you're working on infrastructure in rural areas, a lot of the Farm Bureau, the farmer unions, those are good places to check in and try to plug in and maybe even connect those folks to better folks than the ones they've been working with in the past. I think AARP is wonderful at this. They're focused both on the policy side of using their enormous clout to make sure that cities and states and the federal government are all acting in ways that will benefit all of us, and wisely spending taxpayer dollars. But they also have direct training programs through organizations like OATS, in which, you might say, well, we definitely need a class, but I don't know how to develop a curriculum. Well, there might be classes or resources for classes already available through organizations like AARP that you can bring to your community. And so I would say, make sure you're paying attention to some of those established organizations that are engaged in this, and not passing up on those opportunities.
I do want to, somebody put a question of whether or not the community calls are recorded. Unfortunately, right now they're not being recorded, just because we do like to keep it a safe space for people to either vent their frustrations or talk about what's not working or what isn't. So that's solely the reason why we're not recording them. But, we love this feedback, and we might be assessing ways where we can share those resources that were shared to the community for those who weren't able to attend it. And I also want to share that you can go on our NDIA website, on the affiliate page. You can see all the affiliates that we have, and you can search by your state too. So you can see who in your state is doing digital inclusion work.
There was a question that I think is right up my alley about how to get around the claim of existing telephone and cable companies that their data is all proprietary. It is very difficult to do. One has to you're in a very bad position legally. You cannot compel them unless a state is willing to share that data. Most states, in fact, I don't know of a single state that compels them to be honest in releasing that data. The Federal Communications Commission does not do a particularly good job of getting accurate data out there, although it is supposed to this fall. We'll see where that goes. And so what we see cities doing and communities doing and authorities doing, and I'm thinking about like the ARC Regional Commission, the Appalachian Regional Commission, or ARC, the Delta Commission that serves communities around the Mississippi, I can't remember the exact name, Delta Regional Authority, maybe. They've done speed test data collections. It's a good way to organize people and give them something to do and to go and talk to their neighbors about. That's a good way to start a digital equity coalition, to start talking about these issues and give people a concrete task that's not too hard to surmount. And so you need to collect new data sources, unfortunately. And one of the things I would say is that don't feel too bad about that, because many of the incumbents don't have good data. I don't think a company like CenturyLink or Frontier can honestly tell you what their DSL can do. I don't think many fixed wireless providers, including AT&T and Verizon, can accurately tell you on an address by address basis what they can deliver. So there are not good data sets that one can just unlock necessarily. It would be nice if the federal government or the states compelled them to share accurate data, but in the world that we live in, that is not happening to date. So we need to create our own data sets. I wasn't sure if that shook anything loose for you, Pamela.
No, we can move on to the next question, though, just because I see that there are quite a few coming in.
Okay.
So we already answered that.
There's a question about funding available to train people in what we call outside plant work, fiber splicing and others, to build out and support building networks. This is something that the Fiber Broadband Association has done a wonderful job of. In fact, they even have a train the trainer approach, which is appropriate for community colleges and such learning institutions in communities. We're still trying to get our hands around understanding how to interact with that and make it happen, but the Department of Labor is involved, I believe. And the short answer is that there are some, but many of us that should be doing a better job of sharing that knowledge haven't. But the Fiber Broadband Association and the person who runs it, Gary Bolton, are very invested in this, and I would turn to them in the short term. And in the longer term, I'm hoping that my colleagues and I at ILSR will be able to help share best practices on how to take advantage of that, particularly in Indian country, in HBCUs and things like that, to make sure that people have opportunities to get into this exciting field. At our last Tribal Broadband Bootcamp, I did some splicing. If I can do it, you can do it. Believe me.
Awesome. Another question we have is, can you explain more about what the FCC is planning to release in fall and how it's different this year from the data they used to collect?
The first thing I would say is that it's generous to think it'll be released in the fall. As of right now, if there's any ISPs involved, any service providers, it is notable that you are supposed to be looking at what is called the fabric. The Federal Communications Commission has a contract to identify all of the locations in the United States of America and the territories, I believe, in which there is a premise that should be able to receive broadband service. And a common, claim would be that, on a farm, you have multiple structures, but probably the main structure that they're focused on delivering access to would be the farmhouse. And so that fabric is being developed and will soon be argued about whether it's accurate or not. And then we get into the second fight, which is once the FCC has more or less correctly identified the number of locations in which there should be a good broadband connection, we will argue about whether or not there is a connection at that address. We've long criticized the Federal Communications Commission because its maps have said if one person in a census block has service, we consider everyone to have service. And so we are not seeing that anymore. In the future, in the new data set, supposedly, if they say you have access, you individually should have access. No one is expecting this to work well at the beginning. There's going to be a large challenge process, which we have no idea how it's going to navigate. There was talk about it happening in November. I don't think many of us believe that it's possible to happen in November. So sometime next year would be my prediction of when we'll see this new data from the Federal Communications Commission. And I might be so bold as to say that it won't be until 2024 that we actually have some widespread agreement about the data being accurate inside of it. Are there any last things that pop up for you, Pamela?
No, there is another question though, which I'm pretty sure we didn't answer, but if we have, then we can move on to the next. But Anita asks, what recourse is there, if any, if your state does not submit their letters of intent for either BEAD or Digital Equity Fund?
Yeah, I skipped to the beginning. I skipped to that one toward the beginning
Okay.
when you're talking about DEA, and I think the answer is to make sure that NDIA and others know about it, that they're not planning on doing it. But I do believe all of the states are going to do BEAD, and boy, I sure hope that we get them all to do the DEA too.
Awesome.
So I think we have made that one last real quick question that Yvette put in, but then we're going to have to do the wrap up. And that final question is how that new data from the Federal Communications Commission that I just discussed will change served versus underserved. And this will vary on a state-by-state basis, I believe, which is to say that some states may just go with what the Federal Communications Commission says in terms of whether an address is served or not. Other states are developing their own data sources. In some cases, they are signing NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, with ISPs to get access to their proprietary data, and then promising not to share it. So different states have different approaches. Our colleague at ILSR, Christine, has done a map, which I believe is United States of Broadband map or something like that. It tracks down all of the different mapping things that states are doing. So that's a cool dashboard or a resource that you can find with a pretty simple web search.
Awesome. I think we can wrap it up now. Thank you all.
I don't want to go. I think we let's keep going until there's only one person left.
Let's keep going until Lauren and Denise get their goodies. But I want to thank you all for joining us today. I want to give a huge thank you to Chris for being a great MC, and also for our speakers that gave us their time and knowledge. I also want to put a big shout out to Dosman Lee, our team member over at ILSR. He was the project lead for this, and seriously, this would not have happened without his awesomeness. So thank you to Dosman if you're watching. And so we'd also love for you to stay connected to NDIA and our wonderful community. You'll get access to our newsletter, those community calls, and that wonderful community listserv. So go ahead and go to our website to join.
Thank you. And we have a newsletter at muninetworks.org as well that people can sign up for a weekly blast of what our colleagues are producing and some of our independent freelance writers that we love doing this work. I would like to thank the whole team, both ILSR, the folks that are in the Community Broadband Networks team, as well as everyone at National Digital Inclusion Alliance. I know you all have your hands full, and we deeply appreciate working with you on this. Pamela, it's wonderful. Once again, I feel like, I don't know, like you and me might have to just ditch digital equity and head into the stand-up field, maybe. I think I see a future for us there. I want to thank Henry. Henry is the one that gave us the ambition to try things like this. And Henry has since moved on, but came back as an independent contractor to make this work. And we would not have had anything nearly as cool as this without him. So thank you, Henry. We do have a survey, and the survey will be mailed to everyone who registers. I believe we're going to be getting it up on the screen here, maybe, or maybe it'll be in the comments section. But when you get the survey in your email, please take a couple minutes. We try to keep it really short, but help us do better events in the future, because we all want to do a better job. And you can honestly say that you just think it's time for Pamela to have a professional co-host. And my feelings, I know what I sound like. It isn't a surprise to me.
Oh gosh. All right. Well, this wraps up our second event. Maybe watch out for a third one.
Yes, and thank you so much for the work that you're all doing. This stuff is not going to happen without you all. This isn't something you're doing on the side. Like, this is important for making sure that we have the society that we want to live in together. So thank you so much.